The following is a world-class Bullshitters exclusive.
You never forget where you were when big historic moments happen. Where were you when 9/11 happened? Where were you when bin Laden was caught? Where were you on December 15th, 2017, the day that changed Star Wars forever? Star Wars The Last Jedi has been called many things. It's been called incredible, visually stunning, a masterpiece, a piece of trash, a dumpster fire, and the worst film of all time. Star Wars The Last Jedi is the most divisive science fiction film in history. With a score of 93% fresh from critics and 42% rotten from fans, Star Wars The Last Jedi represents a schism in the Star Wars franchise that is still widening as we speak. The once beloved franchise became a battleground where fans, critics, and Disney themselves fought a battle greater than anything depicted in the film. One of the accelerants of this fiery fiasco was the director, Rian Johnson. During the release of the film, The Last Jedi, Johnson kept himself in the conversation via social media. What would follow would be a historic moment for Star Wars, but in a way no one could see coming. On October 30th, 2012, the Walt Disney Company purchased Lucasfilm for $4.05 billion. At the time, it was being called a new era for Star Wars, with CEO Bob Iger announcing Episode 7. A USA Today article from 2012 stated that Disney expects to more aggressively expand the Star Wars film schedule, following the release of Episode 7 in 2015. The long-term plan is to release a new Star Wars feature film every 2 to 3 years. Star Wars Episodes 7 and 8 would follow probably on a cadence of every other year, and then go from there, according to then CEO Bob Iger. That first film was Star Wars Episode 7: The Force Awakens. The Force Awakens would go on to be a massive success, becoming the highest-grossing film in the United States. On a budget of $306 million, The Force Awakens would go on to gross over $2 billion, with the critics' score sitting at 93% and an 85% from audiences. With a hit under their belt, optimism for the next film in the trilogy was high. The follow-up to The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, opened to the biggest domestic opening weekend in history with a stunning $220 million. While the film opened to massive numbers, the story online was much different. Very early on, it was quite obvious that audiences weren't as enamored with Rian Johnson's offering as critics were. The battle between fans and Lucasfilm was historic. Dissatisfied fans were brushed off and labeled as Russian bots. Loose scientific research was created to corroborate this, yet ultimately proved to be fake. Articles from previously reputable sources were reporting on the situation and labeling any dissenting opinion as toxic. If fans weren't pro-Last Jedi, they were anti-Last Jedi. Star Wars had never seen anything this ugly. The climate that allowed Star Wars to reach this level of vulgarity was created after the release of The Force Awakens. 2016 was the year of the Great Schism in entertainment. Two events would take place that year that would fuel the fire: the presidential election and the release of Ghostbusters 2016. Ghostbusters 2016 was a film that popularized attacking the fans on social media. Director Paul Feig and actor Melissa McCarthy would regularly fuel the flames of dissatisfaction by taking to Twitter to antagonize fans or speaking out against them directly in the press. While Ghostbusters 2016 would go on to be a financial failure, its PR playbook is still being used to this day to varying degrees. There was talk of one character, Rey, being a Mary Sue around the release of The Force Awakens. For context, a Mary Sue is a type of fictional character, usually a young woman, who is portrayed as unrealistically free of weakness. Originating in fan fiction, a Mary Sue is often the author's idealized self-insertion. Mary Sue stories are often written by adolescent authors. The debate online over Rey's Mary Sue status still rages on today. However, after Ghostbusters 2016, the debate became political. The Star Wars landscape had changed. Creatives would fight fans online. Websites would post scathing hit pieces decrying anything that went against Lucasfilm, and one man benefited more than anyone else: Rian Johnson. When it was announced that Rian Johnson would be picking up where J.J. Abrams left off, fans were satisfied with the choice based on Johnson's previous work. Before Star Wars The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson was best known for his surprise hit Looper, a film starring Bruce Willis and Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Hype for the film was high, with many expecting higher numbers than the previous film, The Force Awakens. Not only did Disney require participating theaters to show The Last Jedi in their largest auditorium for a minimum of 4 weeks, essentially forcing out any competition, it also demanded 65% of the ticket sales. Upon release, some issues with the treatment of Luke Skywalker began to arise. Many felt that the hero of the saga was being mistreated and cast aside, all at the service of the new character, Rey. Others had issue with the B-plot with Finn and Rose Tico. Others disliked the handling of Princess Leia, Snoke's death, and Admiral Holdo. The Last Jedi was a divisive film, yet the narrative surrounding the film's release was that fans are making this out to be bad. Thankfully, the financial results paint a much different picture. On a budget of anywhere between $200 and $317 million, Star Wars The Last Jedi grossed $1.3 billion, down nearly $750 million from The Force Awakens. While still a billion-dollar earner, one question began to arise. Where did the audience go? The Force Awakens benefited from nostalgia and repeat viewings. The Last Jedi and its different tone made for a less rewatchable experience. Research shows that video sales of The Last Jedi were nearly half of what The Force Awakens brought in. The audience was not there for whatever Lucasfilm called Star Wars. The sequel trilogy would go on to reach new lows in the subsequent chapter, with Episode 9 reaching the bottom. That'll be addressed near the end of the video. Compared to Disney's other cash cow, Marvel and their Avengers films, Star Wars was underperforming. After The Last Jedi's release, Johnson would take to social media to call fans many things, with manbaby sticking. While benign, this insult would begin a deluge of online outrage. Other creators began to jump in the conversation. Writer Chuck Wendig would become a familiar name in the conversation, regularly antagonizing fans who didn't agree with his political leanings. Things would change for Wendig as he was fired from working on his Star Wars comic book series about Darth Vader midway through its publishing. Wendig noted that he was fired from the remainder of the series because of the negativity and vulgarity that his tweets bring. It was too much politics, too much vulgarity, too much negativity on his part. A Marvel spokesperson confirmed that Wendig had been fired, but wouldn't comment further for the record. While Wendig and other creators felt the backlash, Johnson's name was still attached to a trilogy of films that would be made at some point in the future. This confused fans as the numbers from The Last Jedi showed diminished returns. Just 2 weeks after its release, merchandise from the newest Star Wars film began nationwide clearance. Over the next few months, stores would do everything in their power to rid their shelves of the unsellable Star Wars merchandise based on Rian Johnson's film. This channel documented the decline of the brand over the course of many in-depth videos featuring footage of unsold merchandise. While the merchandise was clogging store shelves, Star Wars was setting itself up for its first financial flop, Solo: A Star Wars Story. While Solo was bombing at the box office, the discussion surrounding The Last Jedi kept growing. Anytime someone expressed dissatisfaction with The Last Jedi, they were promptly reminded that Johnson was still getting a trilogy. Though 5 years have passed since The Last Jedi's release, there's still talk of the Rian Johnson Trilogy. In late August 2022, Johnson was interviewed by Empire magazine to discuss The Last Jedi, and apparently his trilogy is still on the table. In a major new Empire interview, Rian Johnson looks back at The Last Jedi for its 5th anniversary, reflecting with a few years' distance on his episode in the Skywalker saga. "I'm even more proud of it 5 years on," he says. "When I was up at bat, I really swung at the ball. The film," he says, "is not a Star Wars movie. It's a movie about Star Wars and what it means to fans, himself included. I think it's impossible for any of us to approach Star Wars without thinking about it as a myth that we were raised with, and how that myth, that story, baked itself into us and affected us," Johnson explains. The ultimate intent was not to strip away, the intent was to get to the basic fundamental power of myth, and ultimately I hope the film is an affirmation of the power of the myth of Star Wars in our lives. That extends to its controversial depictions of Luke Skywalker as a hermit who was closing himself off from the Force, having sensed darkness in his nephew, Ben Solo, and accidentally pushed him further towards the dark side as Kylo Ren. But as much as Luke begins the film in a very different place than we left him at the end of the original trilogy, his arc over the course of The Last Jedi, ending in his death and birth in the new Skywalker legend, sees him become a galactic symbol of hope and rebellion once more. The final images of the movie, to me, are not deconstructing the myth of Luke Skywalker, they're building it. And they're him embracing it, the director explains. They're him absolutely defying the notion of throw away the past, and embracing what actually matters about his myth, and what's going to inspire the next generation. So for me, the process of stripping away is always in the interest of getting to something essential that really matters. Not only does this mark the 5-year anniversary of The Last Jedi, it also marks 5 years since Lucasfilm announced an all-new trilogy of Star Wars movies to be created by the film's writer-director Rian Johnson. Half a decade later, those films are yet to materialize, but though like Luke Skywalker hidden away on Ahch-To, they seem to have disappeared. They're not totally gone. Speaking to Empire, Johnson made it clear that he hasn't forgot about his set of original Star Wars movies and still has a burning desire to return to the galaxy far, far away down the line. "I've stayed in close contact with Kathleen Kennedy, and we've got together often to talk about it," he tells Empire of his so long-awaited Star Wars series. "It's just at this point a matter of schedule when it can happen. It would break my heart if I was finished, and I couldn't go back to the sandbox at some point." For now, he's hard at work cooking up 2 Knives Out sequels for Netflix. Meanwhile, the Star Wars slate is looking similarly busy, with Andor weeks away from debuting and the return of The Mandalorian coming early next year. Johnson's comments track with what Kathleen Kennedy told Empire at Star Wars Celebration earlier this year. That everyone involved has a full plate now, but the films are by no means dead and buried. Now everybody's so busy, genuinely busy working on things, Kennedy said a few months ago. Rian had such a gigantic success with Knives Out that he's very committed to try to get that done. So it'll be a while, and we'll have to work 3 to 5 years in advance on what we're doing. So that's where that sits. But we love him. There's a spark of hope then. And if The Last Jedi taught us anything, is that all it took was a spark to light the fire to burn the First Order down. We're more than willing to wait for a fresh batch of Rian Johnson Star Wars stories to ignite. Lady, I think it's time to burn it all down. Star Wars is a different property than it once was. After Rian Johnson's The Last Jedi, J.J. Abrams returned to close out the saga with 2019's The Rise of Skywalker. Though able to cross $1 billion on a budget of $275 million, The Rise of Skywalker was the least successful of the saga, earning less than Warner Bros. Joker that was made for $64 million. The Rise of Skywalker would also have another embarrassing loss, as it was the only sequel trilogy film to not cross $100 million in video sales, tapping out at $68 million. The fans had enough of Disney Star Wars. While Star Wars has found some success with streaming, the brand is no longer the juggernaut it once was. New data reveals that customers don't support streaming brands the same way they support theatrical properties. As Star Wars pushes towards an all-streaming future, the cultural impact of each release goes down. There's no doubt about the success of The Mandalorian, but the Book of Boba Fett and Obi-Wan have fans very concerned about the next show, Andor. Star Wars cannot survive the Rian Johnson Trilogy. The Last Jedi was an incredibly damaging film that changed Star Wars forever. Though it was able to earn $1 billion, it set in motion a series of events that has hastened the demise of Star Wars. Star Wars is much smaller now that it cannot cash in on nostalgia. The Last Jedi ruined its ability to do so. By altering the lore under the guise of subverting expectations, Rian Johnson ruined the legacy of Luke Skywalker, leaving him, like Star Wars itself, an empty husk. Thanks for watching today's video. Yes, it's over, but don't cry because there's more, a lot more from World Class Bullshitters, and there's only one way to get it. Hit that subscribe button below. When you do that, you'll get notifications and updates from World Class Bullshitters every time we go live. Basically, you won't miss anything. And if there's one thing I hate, it's FOMO. But the thing most people hate more than FOMO is fear of missing out on World Class Bullshitters, because there's just some things you can't undo. So folks, do yourselves a favor and never miss anything from World Class Bullshitters. One last thing before you go, hit the thumbs up button. Not for our egos, no, they're big enough as this, but it does help us fight the algorithm here, and well, it's man versus machine, and that's the real fight. But if that's not your battle, that's okay. There's one last way you can help WCBS, and that's going over to shopwcbs.com, picking up a t-shirt, a beer glass, a sweatshirt, a poster, all sorts of ways to back WCBS. The difference between us and other YouTube channels is I'm the artist that makes all this stuff, so if you enjoy art beyond t-shirts, you can even read our comic books. We got it all. We're called the epitome of pop culture for a reason, and no, again, it's not for our egos. So folks, make sure you're involved with every aspect of World Class Bullshitters, not just for us, but do it for yourself. We're making the change in entertainment everybody out there wants to see. And a special thank you goes out to all of our wonderful patrons who make this content possible. Go to patreon.com/worldclassbs to get involved and help out the channel.